But thank you so much. And now we're going. So welcome to the third CIC workshop series session on priority setting, how to find focus, how to choose a place to start and just get going. We've been having a lot of fun with these, but I'll introduce myself first and then introduce everyone else to each other. My name is Chi, my pronouns are she, her. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the participants panel and I'm going to click the more option when I hover next to my name. And I'm just going to add in brackets she/her for other people's reference if they don't hear my intro later on in the event. And you can also opt to do that for yourself. But if you choose not to, that's totally fine. I'll just refer to you by your display name for the rest of the session. So my name is Chi, my pronouns are she and her. That's how you can refer to me. I am today with Edge and hosting today's session with you all. I'm calling in from Toronto, even though we are all together virtually. So I wanted to open the space by acknowledging the lands I'm on. If you haven't done this before, you can totally look up where you are in the context of native land. You can look up whosland.ca. That's a great resource for you to find out where you are. And when I looked up where I am, I learned a lot. I found out that Toronto is actually a Mohawk word, TK, Toronto, Tkaronto, and it means the place in the water where the trees are standing. And I know that this place is governed by a pre-colonial agreement between many different First Nations. It's always been a very multicultural space because it's been the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, it includes the Wendat, it includes the Mississaugas of the Credit, and there are many, many other nations that frequented this specific place. It was a high area of trading and of cultural exchange for many years. And they together created the dish with one spoon agreement, which is really straightforward if you've ever heard of it and wondered what that means. It just means that we all take just as much as we need and leave enough for other people because we are all sharing one big dish, which we now call Lake Ontario. But that is the dish that we are referring to. I particularly like reflecting on it when we go into social innovation spaces, particularly. And today I'm thinking about the fact that tomorrow is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I don't know what everyone else has planned for tomorrow in your agenda and programming. But I'm spending most of the day, along with Carla for sure, thinking about social innovation and thinking about how many attempts people have tried to reconcile with each other, to heal with each other. And a lot of that work, they don't call themselves social innovation, but really like they should feel that they can claim that space. And so long as that's what we're calling it, I know that we can't simply social innovate our way out of the amount of reckoning that still needs to happen and the amount of truth that still needs to be told. But the reality is that I can do as many community projects as I would like with the Chinatown community very visibly in Canadian society, very easily as well, compared to urban Indigenous neighbors around Chinatown, in Chinatown, who I still see like homeless against their will, who feel that they don't have access to their language, and who feel that their culture is still actively being eroded because that is the reality. So I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge that I cannot just try to social innovate my way out of it, and we can't just keep on using these kinds of words to wash away what's happened. So hopefully you are all open to walking with that understanding with me as we go into this space of trying to problem solve these massive complex issues and are struggling to find a starting point. So that's why we're having this conversation. My friends here, Carla and Abby, are really experienced in their own way thinking about this, but honestly, all of you in the room with us today also are. So we hope that you'll join us in like an open discussion, also so that we can tailor this conversation to be more helpful specifically to whatever you're working on. So I'll intro them first to get the conversation going. So Abby, what do you need to know about Abby? I think in the context of this conversation, Abby is participating formally as a member of the partnership that's delivering this series from the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Abby is the partnership investments team lead, where she oversees a lot of the business operations, like development and execution of so many large and small partnerships of all kinds of scales, and actually decided to pursue in this topic very formally the project management professional PMP designation. So if you want to go really deep into these kinds of skills, you can very formally, but honestly, you also have a lot of it in your daily life already. So that's where Abby is coming from. Abby is also the mom of 2 kids and like a 12-year-old dog. So also there are many priority setting things that happen outside of formal work context, I'm sure. Carla, on the other hand, is the lead for innovation at the United Church of Canada. That's why Carla is formally a partner with us here today, and has a background in the for-profit world, like with Coca-Cola, like with the Canadian Pacific Railway, but also has transitioned those skills very relevantly into the social impact space. So for the last 9 years, Carla is known for shifting the United Church of Canada's approach to social impact, and started EDGE and started the UPRC and lots of really, really cool projects that they've got going on. So they are tackling big, complex problems is the point I'm trying to make. And I would love to learn a lot more about everyone else in the room. But before we go there, I wanted to introduce some rules for our engagement together. So because we don't have really time to set them together, I'm just going to introduce my house rules. And you can feel free to chime in if you want anything else in the chat as well. So the first idea I want to introduce is that we're going to protect our shared time because we do only have 1 hour together. And that looks like you guys being very mindful about how much you're speaking, whether you're choosing to take up the airspace or whether you're going to be using the chat, and stepping back if you talk a lot, or stepping forward if you still haven't contributed and you do have insights. Like it was very helpful when other people demonstrate what they are taking away for other people to unlock their own learnings as well. I want to introduce this idea of learning versus comfort versus panic. I want everyone here to feel that they're in a learning space, not in a totally comfortable space where all the information is the same as what you already knew and it's just affirming what you're already familiar with. We don't want totally that. We do want some new information that makes you curious, that makes you feel like you're like pushing an edge of what you're totally familiar with, but I don't want you to go into panic. And you are the best judge of that. So if you think there's a relevant story, no matter if it's from your work or from your community of relationships that you're bringing into this discussion, I'm sure they're very, very useful. But if it's honestly a conversation that's really difficult for you that you haven't fully processed, maybe the amount of trust in this room is not enough to support that. So you decide and don't overextend your boundaries. The last one is accepting non-closure, which is related to our limited time together, because we only have 1 hour. And this is a very, very big topic that we could talk about for a long time. We probably won't find all the answers today, but we hope that you'll stay engaged with us and bring that discussion into the other series, or approach us again if you're thinking about getting more involved with CICs or just getting more involved with any of the organizations that are part of this series that you've been exposed to, and want to continue your learning from there. So those are my big 3 ideas to introduce to the room. And I'd love to open it up for everyone to introduce themselves briefly. And if you wouldn't mind saying your name, any pronouns that are relevant for how we should refer to you, which project you're here with, or that's top of mind. Probably many of you are with many projects, but the one that you're thinking of in particular. And what is the priority setting challenge that you guys are facing or have faced recently? So let me take a moment to switch over to look at the participants panel. Sally, can I pick on you to go first?
Okay, great. Well, I just got here and I apologize. I think I was waiting on the wrong Zoom link. So I don't really know exactly what the introduction entailed. So I apologize.
No problem.
My name is Sally and I'm with Kirk Center in Edmonton, Alberta.
Great. Is there a particular priority setting challenge that comes to mind? If you could briefly describe it.
A priority setting challenge?
Mm-hmm. Where finding focus or finding a starting point was difficult. I can come back to you too, if you want me to circle back.
I feel like that's a loaded question because I feel like that is like one of the main things. Yeah, Carla.
That is the big question. Carla's like agreeing.
Yeah, maybe maybe I don't quite have my head wrapped around it because I just jumped in and I'm
Yes, I'm so sorry to have done that to you, honestly. It wasn't fair.
no, that's my doing. So I apologize.
Stefa, I'm wondering whether you're here and want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit sick, so I'm not showing myself. It's one of those days. So I'm here, I'm the program manager at Venture Lab. So we work with the innovation community and help them with commercialization opportunities, entrepreneurial resources and such. So it's really like, how do you build, one of the key kind of challenges that we have is like how to develop a really engaged community and reach out to the right entrepreneurs that are the growth that we want. But just like hoping to learn more by participating in this session. Thanks.
That's amazing. There's a quick question for you in the chat if you want to reciprocate there, asking whether you're in the Markham and York region. Lloyd, whoever's behind that username, just wanted to check in if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Hi, yes, I'm, let's see, where am I here? There I am. I'm Lloyd, he, him, and I'm in Nova Scotia. But I chair a committee with the United Church of Canada that's working on a project to celebrate the anniversary, 100th anniversary of the United Church of Canada in 2025, and that is a comprehensive digital worship resource. And a part of our challenge is going to be in how to introduce that digital resource to as many congregations across North America as we can.
Wow, that's a big project.
It is a big project, it's true. And I too missed a bit of the intro because I don't know, I was on the wrong, I was sitting here at 11 o'clock Atlantic time, feeling kind of silly. But now that we've got the time straightened out, here I am. So please straighten me out if I've completely missed the point of my intro.
Not at all. You've nailed it.
Okay, thanks.
Sally, has that inspired any new thoughts about what's your main challenge or what's top of mind for you when you think about this topic of priority setting?
I think priority setting, our priority at Kirk Center is partnerships and community involvement. And I feel like those have been my biggest priorities and constantly my biggest challenges in so many ways. Challenge to find people of like mind, a challenge that you're for every 10 connections you make, one of them comes through with something. It's so it's personally challenging. It's but those are our two main areas, I would say.
That's like, yeah, that's very helpful context for us to know who's in the room. Yeah, definitely. Abby, do you want to jump in and respond to, you know, or reciprocate with whatever challenges you're looking at?
Challenges that I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
I think I think what I'm also hearing a lot from other people is sort of, you know, ensuring that you're engaging the right people to sort of really help sort of move your project along. I think that's a huge piece that, you know, sometimes I find isn't given enough thought a lot of the time. I think about some of my projects in the past that I've done, and you know, in project management, we have a whole bunch of different tools and things that we use, and you know, we're happy to share those resources with anybody who'd like them. But really sort of taking the time to do some mapping around, you know, who are the stakeholders? So who's influenced by this? who's invested in this, and whose interests are we taking into consideration, right? Like, so what is your target group? And really sort of really naming them and writing them down, I find is a really good exercise. And it's good to do in a group as well, right? So sort of, some of your, close colleagues or other individuals who you're already in conversations with, and really sort of thinking and mapping it out really sort of helps to give you an idea of what the landscape of potential connections are. And then from there, you can really sort of zone in and zoom in on, which ones, for example, have the greatest amount of influence or the greatest amount of interest, right? And those are sort of key stakeholders that you want to be keeping engaged. And they also may be the more likely to be successful in terms of, building a partnership with, right? Or trying to get them to invest in some shape or form in the work. And so, yeah, that I always find is the piece that, always requires a lot of thought. And if you do that really near the beginning, it gives you such a greater understanding of what the issue is, and allows for more perspective on your issue, right? Because you sort of want to start from a larger lens and get an idea of, like, especially when you're dealing with community-based problems or challenges, is who is impacted by this and who are we not thinking about? That's a question I always have in my back, is like, we have all of this, but what am I not asking myself right now? So just
Carla,
some sort of,
you're nodding. Jump in.
Oh yeah, no, I'm loving that, starting with who are all the people who are impacted and influenced, and I would I take this all from a change management lens too, right? So like understanding where we are right now and where we want to go. And so really riffing off of Abby, I then am like, okay, so in change management, who actually doesn't want the change, right? Who is invested in the current system or in the way that things are, that also have the big influence? And so those are the people we want to have those conversations with early, right? And so, because if someone like that is actually on board and co-creating with us on this, and now all of a sudden they're an ally, right? So all of a sudden that's changed, and the resistors are out there. And especially in change, in some of the big wicked problems changes that we're doing, there are the people invested in things staying status quo. Then, and we call it like first, second, and third horizon. So you have your first horizon where they're like institutionalized things, everything's like process and procedure. Then you have the people who are like willing to like mix things up a little bit, but they don't exactly know where they're going. They're the second horizon folk. And they're really great translators to the future of what the changes that you want, to the people invested in status quo. And so then there's the blue sky thinkers, third horizons, who are probably thinking like 50 years out on all decisions. And often when they're speaking, everyone else doesn't understand what they're talking about. Unfortunately, that's me half the time. So, when you have someone like that, and you have this vision of where you're hopeful of like all the wicked problems and these priorities that we're trying to address, you need those people, but you have to have the translators. So I find that when we're talking about like who's impacted and influencers, thinking about change management of who's the people who are going to oppose you, and can you get them to maybe not even an ally, but at least not be as loud as an opposer. And then you kind of look at who are your translators who are helping to express that vision maybe differently. Because maybe, and saying it differently by different people and as often as possible, there's no such thing as over communicating when it comes to change.
Okay, this is like beautiful segue between our last session and this session. If anyone's interested, we spent all of last session talking about relationship building and partnerships. And it really is like clearly, based on what everyone's saying as the starting point, is foundational before you can make the decisions on where to hone in on. I personally am struggling with like how quickly, once you find focus and declare that focus, how quickly you get distractions from all over the place and invitations to go in all sorts of directions. And I find that like in for example, my work with Chinatown in downtown Toronto, we had sort of declared we were going to help with vaccine outreach. And then that started like just it was just a slippery slope to a million other health related requests. Suddenly we were translating one-offs for people's gynecology visits for like, suddenly there was all sorts of things that were no longer vaccine related, but yet somehow felt very urgent and felt very like complex and just felt like it was at the intersection of what our community space was intended for. But it honestly was taking away capacity. It was taking away our time. It was just like we kept on being in this responsive mode, and we weren't sticking with that strategic priority setting, which we honestly already had that conversation with ourselves, but it still ended up happening. And I'm wondering if anyone here has advice or experience or stories related to that kind of challenge, because you can set your priorities. Then how do you stick with it as you evolve? How have you guys learned to do that?
Well,
Abby,
I
yeah.
can jump in. Oh, Sally, I saw you on mute. I'll let you on the floor. No. Okay, so I'm like, being a project manager, I'm very tactile. Like, I like things to be clearly defined. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page around what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's actually done. Thinking about sort of, making sure that we're staying focused on priorities is really understanding why we're doing this, and really sort of having, and it goes back to like, relationship is really at the essence of all of this. And, Carla mentioned, especially in change management, communication is key. Like, communication is going to be the maker or breaker of any project, right? If there's not strong communication, and that communication really sort of builds that connection and cohesion amongst people, and a shared understanding as well, that becomes, a really key piece that I think sometimes gets put to the side when you're dealing with the activities that you're doing, versus really thinking of it as like the communication is the glue that's really going to keep all of this going and flowing the way that it's meant to be. So I would definitely say communication and making sure that everybody's on the same page. And, in terms of prioritizing and trying to keep that focus, I found asking myself, why am I doing this at different checkpoints is really helpful, or why are we doing this, right? And even making a list of all the reasons why I'm doing this. And that list, actually, when you look at it and start prioritizing those pieces, you start realizing where your priorities in terms of your actions are. And I think that has been really helpful in sort of doing that reflection, personally, and also especially as a group, when you're working on a project. So.
Yeah, really similar. I love starting with the vision, or like where we're headed. And when I work with like social enterprises or grant recipients, I always ask them like, okay, so in 5 years, where are you going? And can everyone agree? And we talked about that last week too, about like have that commonality. And then I go, well, if that's the case in 5 years, what could that look like or should look like in 3? And then in that case, actually, what's the work to be done this year? Right. And then it allows us to have to prevent as much scope creep, I guess the tech people would say, right? Like, really, that's what's happening. And so you're like, okay, because then you start realizing that if I do scope creep, the vision and like the why and the thing that's super compelling might be at risk, right? And so we can get there. But if we do that right now, like growing too fast and for-profit is a major danger. Oh, that rhymes. And so the same thing would, like, definitely for a nonprofit would be the same. So if, let's say sometimes I still have to keep my minds open, right? Like, I don't want to be like just so narrow focused. You still have to be open-minded. So when something happens that, like, let's say I know I have to in year 1 do this, this is the core focus, but something pops up. My second test is called adjacencies. So I'm like, this is my core, this is what I'm really good at, this is what our strengths are, collectively and as a team. And then I'm like, if an idea comes up, is that adjacent? Is it close enough that it's actually worthwhile exploring? Or is it so far away that it's almost bound to fail? And so for me, but if it's close, like my example of this is if, the Canadian reference will be, if Tim Hortons had just started to make like, I don't know, the potato wedges right away, it would have failed from coffee. But if you do your 20 minutes fresh coffee and then donuts, your adjacency, and then sandwiches, and then bagels, or whatever the thing was, and then you have your ice, like you keep on doing. Now potato wedges made sense, but if you had just gone coffee to potato wedges, it would have been an utter failure.
I like that sort of dietary creeping.
But you're like thinking about it as a menu of options to present to someone from like their perspective, looking back at you is actually a very helpful exercise. And I do feel like when you're in the moment and you see you're in the potato wedge opportunity. We're going to keep going running with this metaphor. You're in a moment where the potato wedge is like looming before you and you could just execute that project. You do have the capacity for it and you're like convinced, but that would be cool, guys. I think it's hard to say no. I think people in general have an aversion to saying no. I think setting boundaries with yourself is hard, which is why it's hard with your group, right? But I feel like one idea that I've really loved from the whole like abundance and scarcity culture talk that's been going around in social innovation is this idea that like trust that there will be potato wedges in the future. Like just trust that the opportunity will come again, you know, like if you slowly grow your menu to that point in a logical manner, it's like you will not overextend your boundaries and it will make sense one day. And like just it's someone else's potato wedge in this moment. Let it be. Just let it manifest itself again in the future. And I feel like that takes like a confidence, you know, very KonMari. Yes, Steph, in the chat.
Well, and I think that's really sort of connected to sort of thinking about your activities and what you're doing in terms of what is the highest like value, right? Like what's the highest value to us in terms of contributing to our bigger goal, right? And what we're really trying to achieve. What is the vision? Like which one has the highest value? Because those are the ones that are going to be the biggest payoff in a sense, right? In terms of moving and shift and moving towards that bigger change. But it's also the ones that are going to create the biggest value for all your stakeholders, right? For other people who are engaged as well. And so when you think of it in terms of that, then you get more engagement, you get more cohesion, you get more growth and sort of commitment and sort of shared vision. So and the value of those potato wedges are questionable.
That was a perfect exercise of like Abby translating our questionable metaphor back into the official like nonprofit world. I feel like that's actually a really underrated skill is like we do know how to do all these things, but like it's useful. I would say like keep this footage and play it back when you are writing your next grant and use all the words that Abby just used instead of the potato wedges. Stefa, you had unmuted. I'm curious what you're going to jump in and say.
Oh, I just said that as individuals that are, you know, innovating, and there's so many interesting individuals in the room, have different kind of concepts that they bring to the table. And I think that it's easy to get overwhelmed with all these different opinions. And you're like, oh, these are all great ideas. And we oftentimes like add them to like our list of to-dos. And I just found it so valuable for myself, who's a planner, to use kind of like the Kanban method and just being like, okay, I wrote it down. It's on my list. It's on my back burner or on my to-do list, but it's not on my list of things to do today. And that just gives me a lot of peace of mind when planning.
We call it the parking lot. What did you just call it?
The Kanban?
The Kanban.
Yeah, it's a project management tool and it's great. Because there's also different ways to use it. I think everybody sort of, you know, who uses it regularly has different ways of doing it, but the parking lot idea is definitely part of it. What I love about the Kanban board, and really it's sort of, you know, like for those who don't know, it's just like swim lanes, right? So you sort of have, and you put it up on a chart, you usually keep it in your office. And you really start, which I think is really great, especially for community work, is starting with user stories, right? I think, and really sort of keeping like, these are the things that people, you know, our stakeholders have told us are important and our priorities. And then from there, you build out what your activities are, right? Like, what are we going to do to meet this sort of target in a sense, right? And sort of, it really sort of allows, you know, us, especially in nonprofit, to keep our community priority in terms of our actions, even though it seems sort of, you know, I think what I just said seems counterintuitive because, you know, the purpose of our mission is to meet our community, but at times we get very involved and invested in the work and delivering the work that we're doing, that it becomes a less of a co-creation piece than it could be. And so yeah, so sort of, you know, anyway, Kanban board is a great option. We can put that, I can add that link to a simple how to create one. And it's honestly great. And visuals are awesome, right? Like I think those visual reminders are always helpful.
For me, I think like one thing that also is helpful reminder is that as we are prioritizing is that we still have to allow room for the experimentation, especially in startup phase, right? So when we're doing some of these things that are new, it's paying attention to Pareto's Law. So you're kind of thinking that you should, from 20% of your activities, actually have 80% of the impact or results. So you don't know at the beginning because you're kind of discovering things, but that's something that you're looking for is like, they're not all equal. All of your activities aren't having the same results. And so even having a time to reflect back and take a look at, okay, what happened this last week or this last month? Oh, actually, this marketing activity got way more awareness, or like when we did this, all these volunteers, or like when we had this activity, there was like more collaboration. So whatever it is that looks like success for you is like some of the activities are going to do better at that. And I like looking at that because it also starts telling you what to stop doing. So when we're thinking about what to do, there's this other side of what to do less of or what to stop doing. And that might be a tool to start being able to figure that out.
So many useful tools and references to methods, which have very thorough Wikipedia pages, but I'm just dropping the keywords in the chat if anyone needs them. Hopefully we'll have the video transcribed as well. Are there any others that come to mind, Stepha, Sally, Lloyd, that you actually love using and love to share with the group? I have one that I really loved, was gifted to me in a workshop by someone named Shagufta. And it was really simple Venn diagram for yourself, and you can do it for your group, but I really like evaluating it for me. And in one circle, you fill the answer to the question, what really hurts my heart right now about the world? And in the other circle, you fill the answer to what are my unique skills and practices, activities that really bring me joy and are regenerative for me, like they're easy for you if they don't feel like a stretch. And in that section of that Venn diagram, in that eye, you kind of see where you are called to service. And that's one way sometimes when there are such complex, large issues and you're a community-minded person, that's sometimes one way to just simply prioritize. And you can do that to ask a question to a much more minute scale or scale it up as you need. But I really loved doing that exercise, and I like actually doing it annually to see if the answer has changed over time.
Mine's actually really similar to that. And like, I have a little bit of like, what are the strengths that I have? So I love your language though. And then I throw in like, what am I passionate about? And it's so interesting when they're not the same. Then I'm like, that's unfair. Why do I have to be passionate about this, but this is my strengths? And so that's one piece. And then the third piece, I'm like, I look externally, like, what does the world need right now? And then I look at those ones of like, and so really similar methodology. It's great.
Totally. And this again calls back to the last workshop, because it's like our assessment of what the world needs is not always accurate. Like this is where the consultation and the actually being involved with those relationships and talking to people is so useful, because then you get a more accurate pulse on like what is actually needed versus what am I arrogantly assuming that other people need from me, is a good shift in mindset as well. Exactly. Yeah. Carla, you talk about that all the time. I would love to throw another prompt at you all. I'm curious if you guys have any examples of when you've had a bad experience with priority setting, like when you couldn't get all of the stakeholders at the table to agree what the priority was. Was there still a way to compromise with multiple priorities, or do you just absolutely advise against doing that for a project?
For me, I don't know if Lloyd was going to speak. I just, I keep on asking why. I think usually when you get stay too high up, like, so, or maybe it's too low, too tactical, you ask, well, why do you want that? And then why? And so you keep on going deeper of something that could have a commonality. It typically is just because you haven't done that. And then I build out what my vision is. But I also agree, like there's some partnerships, some relationships, we talked about this last week, that won't work. Right. So I think always like recognizing that what Sally was saying too, you know, like how many, like not every partnership is going to work. And so kind of looking for alignments that way too would be an assessment tool.
I think that's something that I always want to make sure that all the stakeholders around are happy. And oftentimes, like I'll use, it's kind of like a project management tool, like an RTM. So it's a requirements traceability matrix. It sounds very boring, and it pretty much is, but I just kind of keep tabs of like different things that people are saying, so that later on is a bit of a data approach where you can kind of reflect back and be like, oh, this individual said this. And then you kind of get those themes running, and you can use them for program and project development. But basically, it's a struggle to kind of get obviously all the stakeholders thinking the same about a specific project. And I've come to, I think that I'm a second horizon where I'm, you know, trying to be that connection, but I feel that there's like the leadership. Then there are those that have more of that visionary approach, and I'm in between, but then realizing that there's also individuals on the sides that are on the same level as me, but in different departments that also need to support. So it's like bringing those people, like going horizontally as well as vertically. So that's a bit of a challenge. So I'm just starting to realize that I think that with my second horizon individuals, I should just create one team and kind of be like the program or project manager for that. And at least there's alignment in like the middle, and then kind of go be the person between the vertical, the first horizon and third horizon, if that makes sense.
And I don't know if the language of bridge is helpful. That's something that I like. What would a bridge look like here? And bridges can look different. So it's been interesting for our work right now. I actually have like 5 different experiments of what bridging looks like. And so at different levels, and like people thinking differently of how could the message be different? Is it good enough? Is it clear enough? Is it accessible enough? And so I try to never assume that the second horizon is done. It kind of goes back to what we said, like you can never over communicate in this work. Just that's a yellow flag, just for trust me, we've been through it.
Okay. I'll keep building the bridge and recommunicating continuously.
And I think also it's important to recognize like you don't always have to be the bridge. I find like as a project manager, we always want to be that person that fixes everything. And, you know, it's sort of, you know, thinking about, you know, is there somebody else who could bridge this conversation and these sort of, you know, standing, you know, opinions on direction, for example, that could actually find the connection there where, you know, everybody's getting reconnected to the common goal and why we're doing this, much to Carlet's, you know, like digging deep into the whys is really helpful. But also just, you know, willing to take yourself out of the situation if you're not the one to bridge it, right? And being okay with that, right? I think that's the big piece of just, you know, recognizing we're all trying to move this project forward, not just my status in delivering this project or making sure this is successful. So.
I'm not Bridge, I am Stefa.
But also recognizing that not all problems, sometimes I just try to be like, oh, like a lot of these, like capturing those themes and be like, oh, maybe this one project will solve all of those challenges that all of these people are talking about, and realizing that there might not need to be different projects and different conversations and different bridges, and that you can't necessarily solve all of these, you know, issues and pain points with one particular project, and just being okay with that.
I think that we have found that here at Kirk, that because we are this space that can be so many things, and every group that we speak to has a different, and every stakeholder has a different idea of what that could be and what it looks like and what the community needs and what the community wants and how that looks. And I found myself being all over the place and trying to be that connection with every idea. And it became overwhelming, and not just overwhelming, but I didn't feel like I had the priorities really sorted out as far as what was happening in my smaller world. So I did feel like I had to then release that to those groups and put together the groups that needed to be put together, and then they then really I'm just their bridge to the building at that point, not to the project.
I feel like that echoes again the idea of communication, but actually as like a defensive mechanism. Well, maybe we don't have to think about it as defense, but you do need to defend your priority. It's like, this is what I am focusing on right now, and I need to not be the only person advocating for that to be the case. I need it to be very clear to everyone else that this is what I'm focusing on. So I'm going to tell you all that this is explicitly my focus, so that you all can advocate to protect my time on it internally within your team, and also within the context of your partnerships. Like then you don't feel like you're like the only person fighting that battle with yourself to stay focused. Then like maybe your colleagues or your teammates or your community members can also be like, oh, actually, like Lloyd is like probably busy with this thing. I mean, I think it would be appropriate if you asked for a referral, but I would suggest maybe you approach him with that idea, like maybe in 3 months or something like that. Like, people can do these things in your periphery, and actually take that emotional labor off of you sometimes, which is like incredibly helpful, and is another good reason to be proactively communicating 100%. So I am, setting expectations. I am curious to come back to the very literal question of, there are these opportunities, there are these funds rolling around. How do you literally pick something and get started? If someone is just feeling like they're swimming in chaos right now out there, re-listening to this episode of this series, like, it's all nice to say, like, you know, ideally, this is how you would priority set before you go into it. But let's say someone's like swimming in the thick of it. How do you crawl your way back out? Like, what are the tools and first response things you guys have done to triage your own situations in the past, or have helped other groups through that?
I feel like communication is just like back to good communication. For me, I was, keeping my head above all the other ideas, and I was desperately trying, and I probably still am in many ways, still trying to sort of figure out exactly where a focus should be. And I just found that just straight up asking and getting the feedback and the communication was helped me see what other people's priorities were, other people's number one action points were, and that I find really helpful. Then I don't feel like I'm just swimming in a whole bunch of random things that are being shot at me, or even things that are coming out of my own brain. Then I'm really hearing from the horse's mouth.
Welcome to Marianne. Hand it over to Carla.
Yeah, no, I think for me, I'm always thinking about, well, what's taking a lot of time for me, but might not necessarily be strategic. So I always try and like book things that are really going to, if I do them, they're actually going to reduce my time in the future, right? So if I organize my emails, or if I set up something, or if I do it well, that I'm not going to have that work later. So that's one thing that I look for. The other thing I look for is a small win. So for me, again, with the change management side of things, if I find an activity or a task or a focus that is going to make a big impact that everyone on the team can see, and if it takes a very like the least amount of time or effort, so it's like pretty easy to implement, those two criteria, if they have both of them, that rockets to the top for me. Because what happens is, like, if we are able to achieve one small win together, the next thing is going to be that much. It seems like an elephant and you can't achieve it, but if you get that one thing, then the next thing will be easier and easier and easier until we're actually able to do that, reach that big vision. So yeah, lots of great examples on that, but those are the things. It's biggest impact and ease of implementation, and then go.
A lot of what we've been talking about is referencing the 4 quadrants. And just to like go back to 101 level, if you've never drawn a 4-quadrant model of your to-do list, that's why we've been, constantly saying balancing between 2 variables. It's like, how much cost does it take me to invest into the solution versus like how urgent or critical it is. That's a classic quadrant. I think it literally is just called the 4 quadrants in some cases. Here's one random link I found for it. But if you've never used this particular style or method, it's like taught in many different disciplines. It's quite useful, even for like personal household chores. I would highly recommend them.
Well, and there's also like the stakeholder mapping, which uses the same 4 quadrants, right? So you can really identify who, you want to be managing closely, or, keeping, building, strengthening that relationship versus who you should just be keeping informed versus, whose needs should we be monitoring. It's a really great exercise to really sort of, just sort of identify and know where your priorities set in terms of, where you're spending your time communicating and with who. So.
There, I threw in another link for the stakeholder mapping, just one of many examples of how you could set it up, and some of the free online tools you could use. And, if you are applying for grants very often, sometimes it's nice to, even if the funders don't ask for it, it's nice for you to do this exercise and export it as an image and submit it anyway. Like, it shows that you've done the amount of thinking required behind your project, and it builds confidence for the folks who are considering your project to either partner with you or to just better understand what it is you're up to. Like it's an exercise that actually is demonstrable and that it's worth documenting. Like, feel free to share those when you've gone through those steps yourself. Marianne, I wanted to check in on what is it that drew you to the priority setting session? Is there anything in particular that you're tackling at the moment?
Well, I'm just a junkie for learning, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm guilty of taking on too many projects and then not really stepping back to think what is the bang for the buck that I'm getting. But sometimes I kind of feel like, it's, the more that you throw out there, then the likelihood of something sticking is higher. So that sometimes that's what drives my priorities, is just kind of seeing, where maybe there's a synergy between something that I'm interested in doing and, say, a grant that is also interested in that. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming along. We're heading into our last 10 minutes together. And I just wanted to open the floor for any burning questions that you guys wanted to bring to the group in particular, and leave some space for that. Do any of you have a question you'd like to pose to a peer group?
Maybe the question could be like, how do we rally people, like, and understand what our collective priorities are? I'm not supposed to ask questions, am I?
No, you totally are allowed to ask questions. But is your question like literally in this room? Like, what are everyone's priorities? And could we see if there's any alignment?
Oh, I wasn't, but like, we could do that.
Well, it was actually, I had a conversation like that just this morning with someone who said, where are the innovation leaders of today? Like, she was just bemoaning the whole federal election thing, where there wasn't really anyone who was putting forth a vision that would excite people and get people going. So where are the leaders who are creating innovation, and how do we inspire people to be innovative.
And did you say you would introduce them to everyone coming to the series? Carla, did you want to elaborate on that?
No, well, I'm just excited at what Marianne just said. It's like, so that's actually the burning question that I've been having too, is like, how do we empower leaders? And it was really interesting to me because we actually created a design jam or like a community innovation challenge sample on October 18th to try it out. Like, how would we actually figure this out? And I'm a board chair for a nonprofit. And we had our board retreat this last weekend, and we're talking about all of our priorities. And there just felt like there was so much to do. See, this is very relatable. And at the end of it, like just talking to my co-board chair with me, we were just noodling around and we're like, oh, the root challenge, the priority, the things that we can agree upon is if we empowered leadership in our neighborhood, like we don't have to worry about these other things, like they would be solved. And so it's kind of interesting that you're resonating on the same thing. We've already created design jet. Anyway, this leadership empowerment seems to be maybe for all of our work is really what we're leaning into.
Well, actually, you know, I totally believe in synchronicity. And I was just reading a book this morning, The Leap by Chris Turner, and he was talking about how the way to get things done is at the neighborhood level, but to say, you know, the other neighbors, your neighbors in our neighborhood are doing X, Y, and Z, come join us. And that it's that social contract, right? That, oh, well, if other people are doing it, then it's okay for me to do it. So it's maybe stretching the truth a little bit to see how many of the neighbors are actually doing something, but just making it acceptable for people to be innovative. They don't want to stand out from the crowd, right? So how do you make being innovative more comfortable?
That's a big question. The only suggestion I would have is really sort of, and I noticed that it wasn't actually mentioned much through this workshop, is really sort of having prioritizing learning, I think, is a really great avenue to connect people, to bring together people, and to really sort of, you know, also be open to the challenges that are coming ahead, right? And sort of finding, how are we, you know, learning together? What are we learning together? And is this learning going to feed into how we're going to be moving forward together? And I think coming from that space of sort of curiosity is a really great way to start inviting more people in, and other people who may not have thought of joining in. And then from that, it sort of just becomes sort of this networking potential sort of learning tool, right? In the sense of creating a learning network.
That could be the evergreen priority, like above all else, you know, like there's just like a layer of like open learning attitude. That would probably would be just generally good advice. I wanted to ask one last question specifically to Abby because we have you here. But among us, like, I'm really curious, like you decided to pursue like formally a PMP designation, and there, you know, this skill is like what we're talking about today is like so related to the formal project management, like our understanding of how to pursue those things. So like, would you recommend other people do it, or would you recommend a certain kind of person to also consider that? And how are those tools also like accessible in other formats? Could you talk more about that?
Sure. It's so I guess there's a couple of questions in there. So why did I personally get into project management? I got into project management because I love being able to hold the sort of larger goal in mind, and also supporting, and, you know, speaking about empowering leadership, is empowering others to be able to do their work, their activities, and to really contribute the way that they can to their full potential. And I think that's a really big part of project management is really sort of recognizing that people are your greatest resource, and how do we maximize that and really put that at the forefront of the work that we're doing, right? We all need to contribute to it. And, we really want to, and I want to be able to make sure that other people are, working at their full potential and really invested in the work, right? And with that comes all the, wanting to be and strengthening communications. I tend to love to talk a lot, and project managers tend to like to do some talking ourselves, even though we also recognize the moments where we need to, let the floor go to others. And also it's a really sort of investigative, right? Around sort of like, really trying to help other people work through, like, what are we trying to do here? Right? What are you trying to achieve here? Why does this matter to you? Like, all those big sort of questions come through it. And then for me, I love planning. So a big part of, doing, creating great work plans and making sure that everybody's on the same page really helps a project move forward and progress. And sort of, it's sort of recognizing that I don't need to be at the forefront to make this happen. There's other, leaders and individuals who can do that and should be doing that. But for me to be able to support others to really do that work, getting the certification, it's a personal choice. I think it's a great framework that is really applied to, any part of your life. I think I've taken tools from this and applied it to my life in all aspects. And so with that, it was a great sort of individual learning as well. Also project management, like through, the Project Management Institute, it's a great network of other project managers, right? So you have lots of support, you have other individuals who are dealing with challenges that you can sort of, reach out to, and it's continuous learning as well, right? So it's one of those sort of holds you accountable to continue to want to be a better project manager. I think that's one of the key pieces of it as well, is that it's very learning focused and, making sure that every year you're progressing forward. And so in that sense, it's my personal accountability to make sure that I continue to grow as a project manager, because there's always more to learn. So yeah, I hope I answered all the questions there.
You totally did. Yeah, I feel like that gives a sense of like, if that sounds interesting to you, if that really feels like it's calling you, you can go a lot deeper into these skills very formally. But of course, you can also follow all the links that get floated around in peer groups like this. I'm sure if you ask your friends if there were specific tools and resources they used, you would discover a lot about them that you didn't know before. So pick your colleague that seems particularly organized and find out what their method is. Oh yeah, Abby?
Can I say one more thing? Is that I have to say, as as a professional certified project manager, which I think is sort of a silly thing to say, is that we all manage projects. Like, everybody's a project manager in some shape or form. And there's just, when you start really looking into the skills that are involved in that, I think that's a big sort of win for everybody, is to recognize that in yourself and that you're using these skills in your everyday. And that there's just, additional tools and resources and knowledge building that can happen to strengthen those sort of skills. So
that will be our key takeaway message. Carla, could I get you to do a final invitation to the broader CIC challenge and some more context behind why this event is called that?
Okay, great. Yeah, I can. So the Community Innovation Challenge, this is just one of the steps as you consider having an expression of interest to have your own community innovation challenge. So basically what that needs is you need 4 partners, including yourself. It can be individuals or organizations, like we're pretty loose on what those 4 partners need to look like. Then you need to actually choose your challenge. So like, what's the problem that you want? And so that's what Abby was talking about, of engaging lots of people, really starting to better understand the problem. And that workshop's coming up next, I think, understanding your problem. Once you have the problem and your partners in place, it's actually co-creating what you can do together based on all the assets that you have. So that's your people, your property, everything that you have. And then our partners, not only are we supporting you on the project management and sustainability with workshops on that as well, but also you can have $2,000 of bootstrapping funding to get that off the ground. So continue learning here. You can actually have your design jam as of October 15th. So coming up quick, where you can actually get that started, and excited to hear what you all come up with.
And that brings us to the hour. In respect for everyone's time, we can officially conclude. But seriously, thank you all so much for spending the time teaching me things. and discussing with each other. Please feel free to use the private message function in the chat. If you click around, you can actually change it from everyone to individuals. If there's someone you want to connect with and exchange contact info with, we also hope that these event series facilitate connections between everyone who's doing similar work anyways. And very, very good luck to you all with all the projects you all are working with. And please